From the dawn of human life until very recent times, the way we fed ourselves varied little from that of the animal world. Like them, as hunters and gatherers, we roamed the planet freely, foraging for food. If we were thwarted in our quest, we simply moved on and searched elsewhere. But around 10,000 years ago, we began to manipulate nature, to force it to produce the foods we needed. Our first act of intervention was to domesticate plants, an act which was to drastically alter our way of life. For by the planting of crops, we were able to assure a constant and plentiful supply of food available in a fixed location. Some of us ceased to be hunters and gatherers and became farmers. From the field grew the village. From the village grew the city. From the city grew the nation. The birth of modern civilization stems from the simple act of placing seeds and plants into the ground. As our needs have grown, the way in which we have coerced nature has become increasingly elaborate. But nature can never be totally tamed. And so many of us, like the Maya of Yucatan in Mexico, desiring a plentiful harvest, appeal to our gods through prayer. These Mayas still practice one of the earliest forms of food production, horticulture, the cultivation of crops without the aid of irrigation, draft animals, or fertilizers. In the tropics, torrential rains leach the shallow soil of nutrients. To replace them, the Maya use a technique known as slash and burn horticulture. First, they cut down an area of the forest and leave it to dry for some 8 months. Then they burn the dried vegetation. Carefully calculating the wind, they start backfire. Then they set the main fire. The fire burns everything. Nutrients which have been stored in the vegetation remain in the ashes, enrich the soil, and thus make cultivation possible. After the rainy season, when the ashes have been absorbed into the soil, the Maya plant. With a simple digging stick, they bore holes in the soil and plant their seeds. This form of cultivation represents an ingenious accommodation between the needs of the Maya and their delicate environment. Corn, beans, and squash are all planted in the same hole. The 3 plants break ground at the same time. The squash vines spread over the ground and cut down on the growth of weeds. The beanstalks use the corn for support and put back in the soil the nitrogen used by the corn. The soil, however, remains usable for 2 years at most. Then the land must once more be consumed by the forest. It will be 10 years before it will be productive again. Like other horticulturalists, the Maya live in villages, grouping their houses, storage bins, and animal pens together in order to remain close to their crops and to maintain large enough groups to support the land. A settled life, control over crops, and the creation of a surplus, however small, leads directly to the explicit notion of property. With horticulture, for the first time in human history, access to land is formalized. There is a concept of ownership. With ownership, the egalitarianism of hunting and gathering societies is diminished, and cultures exhibit the beginnings of social stratification, the differential access to wealth and prestige. In Melanesia live other horticulturalists. They rely on root and tree crops. Their principal crop is the yam. Their way of life also reflects the greater social complexity that marks the transition from hunting and gathering to cultivation. The calendar of these people is based on the yam cycle, and the months of the year are named for the work being done at that time in the yam gardens. Families provide food for rituals in which thousands of yams are displayed and distributed to visiting clans. High status is conferred on men who give away the most and best yams. The result is an elaborate system of ranking called the Numbangi. As the men reach higher grades, they enjoy greater respect and authority, and in such societies, one begins to see the emergence of political leadership. Although a chief, or big man, may not have much coercive power, he enjoys great influence and attracts others to follow his lead. In order to assure a good harvest, the Melanesians practice an extremely dangerous ritual. Fertility is its major symbolic theme. For 2 or 3 weeks of every year, the men construct a gigantic tower. When completed, each man will dive from the top, a height of 80 feet. The tower is divided into several levels, each corresponding to a different part of the body. The lowest level, the ankle; the highest, the top of the head. Each man builds his own diving platform. These have supports which represent the male and female sexual organs. In the forest, the divers select vines which will be tied to their ankles to break their fall. To dive well, the top of the diver's head must just graze the ground. It is therefore critical that each diver carefully measure the length of his vines. The slightest miscalculation could mean the difference between life and death. It takes skill and great courage, but the Melanesians believe it ensures a good yam harvest. Horticulture, as practiced by the Melanesians and the Mayans, is still successfully carried out in many parts of the world today. It represents an immensely creative step in human adaptation. However, yields are low and surplus is small, and horticulturalists remain essentially subsistence farmers. This is the ancient city of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the heart of a once great civilization. Like other cities in ancient Greece, Egypt, and Central America, Angkor was built on another form of cultivation, intensive agriculture. This civilization and all others would not have been possible without the huge surpluses created by this form of food production. Angkor was created by a dozen Khmer kings between the 9th and 13th centuries A.D. Its magnificence and corresponding level of social complexity with rulers, courts, soldiers and priests, craftsmen and workers flourished because of intensive agriculture. A form of cultivation which embraces diverse techniques. In Angkor, it's centered around sophisticated water storage and irrigation systems. These mastered the vagaries of monsoon rains and drought to grow rice, enough eventually to feed 1 million people. Today, rice provides the basic diet for over 3 billion people, 60% of the world's population. These paddy fields on the island of Taiwan are among the most productive in the world. Many of these plots are cultivated 2 or even 3 times a year. 1 cultivated acre can feed 7 people. As in Angkor, this high yield is largely attributable to expert water management, the design and controlled use of irrigation to assure continuous fertility. In addition to irrigation, wet rice culture demands many other skills, a discipline of work and meticulous care. The farmers of Taiwan employ many of the techniques we associate with intensive agriculture. Draft animals, like the water buffalo, dramatically increase the amount of energy available for input into the land. They assist in plowing, harrowing, and tilling, that is, turning over the earth, leveling it, and clearing it of weeds. Some fine harrowing is human-powered, however, to guarantee even spacing and straight rows. Fertilizer is applied 2 or 3 times a season, the first during land preparation. Heavy applications are required for high yields. Herbicides are applied to control weeds and combat insect pests and plant diseases. Wet rice culture is labor-intensive. The greater number of farmers working, the greater the yield, and consequently, the greater the number of people that can be fed. This is linked to the growth of large families and the emergence of government, which regulates all aspects of food production and distribution and provides the social controls necessary to keep order in large societies. Today, genetic engineering is another major technique of agricultural intensification. The Taiwanese have developed hybrids of the rice plant, which are shorter in the stem, stiffer in the stalk, and which produce many tillers from each root. This creates stalks which are more resistant to wind, disease, and pests, and give the maximum number of heads per plant. Harvesting is accomplished with the sickle, an invention as old as agriculture itself. Today, portable drum threshers, powered by foot, are more efficient than hand beating of the stalks. But hands and feet no longer do all the work. In a modern world, the farmers of Taiwan have incorporated the latest addition to the inventory of intensive agriculture: mechanization. A power tiller can do 5 times the work of a water buffalo, thus increasing productivity. But this isn't the only reason that machines are used. In a land where the children of farming families flee to the city in search of less arduous and more lucrative jobs, labor shortage has made them a necessity. But the Taiwanese are low-income farmers, and machines and fuel are expensive. Therefore, many of the rice farmers of Taiwan choose to continue to perform their traditional tasks methodically and precisely by hand. While rice is the staple of the Orient, another grain, wheat, sustains much of the rest of the world. In Afghanistan, farmers produce wheat just as they have done for some 8,000 years. Yet this, too, is intensive agriculture. Like the farmers of Taiwan, the Afghanis also rely on an elaborate irrigation system. But here it performs an additional function. It provides the power to turn the millstone, to make flour from the grain. In Afghanistan, as elsewhere, intensive agriculture has brought about many profound social consequences. In town, farmers could find customers among non-farmers for their surpluses, and with their earnings they could buy what they could not produce for themselves. A new and powerful institution developed, the market, and with it, commerce and trade. A monetary value was ascribed to goods and services, producing a profound transformation in human relations. The merchant appeared on the scene, the banker, tradesman. Along came powerful distinctions in wealth and access to power and prestige. The pace of specialization quickened, producing a host of professionals and craftsmen. Along with specialization, the territorial state appeared, with its panoply of leaders, bureaucrats, and officials, sanctioned by a religious hierarchy. And finally, professional soldiers, armies, and organized warfare. Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes galloped over these very lands, pastoralists who looted the rich spoils of agriculture. Warfare became organized theft. Today, this spirit still lives in the Afghan game of buzkashi. It reflects the art and the science of cavalry offense. The objective is to carry the beheaded, gutted carcass of a calf around a distant goal, then ride back and lay it in a winner's circle. As chaotic as it might appear, the melee actually represents tightly convened tactics, which suddenly springs the winner loose on a clear path to the victory circle. Ironically enough, once the Mongols had seized an empire, they were forced to become farmers themselves in order to support it. But the social consequences of intensive agriculture have been no more dramatic than its impact on the environment. In America, we began as a nation of immigrant farmers, seeking new lands to plant, drawn ever westward. The frontier shaped our dreams, our character. Oh, beautiful, we sang, for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty above the fruited plain.
America, America, God shed his grace on thee.
We wanted to create an abundance such as the world had never seen, and we did.
From sea to shining sea, America.
Tearing through the tough, matted grass of our great plains, we turned the rich, fertile soil and created a cornucopia of wheat. But this uncontrolled, intensive planting resulted in an alarming drop in the water table and increased the loss of topsoil through erosion. The idea of a balance with nature was forgotten. When drought and heavy winds came, the result was the creation of an unanticipated nightmare, the Dust Bowl. It was one of the chief contributors to the misery of the Great Depression. Dispossessed farmers from the plains trekked west in vast caravans in search of a new promised land. Novelist John Steinbeck described this migration in his classic work, The Grapes of Wrath. They swarmed across the land like locusts, hungry for food, for work, for a place to rest. A people on the move, fearful, desperate. But as the hard times eased, the fear and the desperation subsided. The farmers of the Midwest resettled. Much of the Great Plains became fertile again. The combines rolled once more to harvest the amber waves of grain. Today, our land not only feeds us, but also much of the rest of the world. This abundance is a direct result of the further intensification of agriculture. Modern machinery has transformed the American farm. At the turn of the century, nearly half our population worked on the land. Now less than 3% of us do. Although our country was built on, and still is sustained by, agriculture, in many ways we have ceased to be an agrarian people. The exodus from the land has occurred in all industrial nations. It is because we have been freed from toiling in the fields that we have been able to make our modern world. For this freedom has given us the time and the energy to pursue the new and varied occupations necessary to sustain our contemporary societies and to foster their growth. But as our occupations become more specialized and the way we live more urban, we cease to relate directly to the land. Even the food in our supermarkets seems remote from the soil. It is easy to forget that it is, in fact, a product of nature, and that each of our cultures is intimately related to the ways we choose to utilize our world's natural resources. Our society, and most others, would not have been possible without that first simple act of placing seeds and plants into the ground.